Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Biswajit Ghosh, Professor of Sociology from the University of Bardhaman, West Bengal. I am also the coordinator of this paper called Methodology of Research in Sociology. The title of this module is Ethnography, Immersions in the Field and Thick Description. Now, the basic objective of this module is to introduce you the use of ethnographic method. This is one of the most widely used method in sociology and social science. You would also acquaint with certain ways of constituting the field, of doing ethnographic fieldwork and of writing ethnographies. One would also like to know how ethnography has emerged and is also transformed over the years. Now, let me begin with the basic question. What is ethnography? The ethnographic method involves the practice of fieldwork in which the researcher produces an account of a culture through close interaction, observation and engagement in the everyday life of people from that culture. That means you mix with people, you stay with them, you observe them, you engage with them and you understand their culture. It has been one of the most distinctive methods of producing knowledge both in anthropology and in sociology. Now, it is not just about culture being studied, you are studying the whole life. On the other hand, the written account which emerges from these observations is also called ethnography. So, the central tools of knowing in the ethnographic approach are two. One is the field, that means you are recording observation, learning from a close engagement with the people from a certain context over days and months and years. This is called the field. The other is the researcher himself or herself, whose presence and interaction with those in the field and analysis create knowledge about a culture. So, these are the two things that are very important in any discussion on ethnography. Ethnography emerged as an approach that addressed anthropology's essential interest in knowing about other cultures and at the same time made one sensitive to the peculiarities of what is considered one's own culture through observations of the other. That means if you get to know about the other, you become more aware of the way your culture is different from that. The technique was initially distinctive to social anthropology, but later it came into use in sociology. If you look into the history of ethnography, the way they are being used, the first being used by people like Louis Henry Morgan, an American anthropologist who collected kinship terms of the Iroquois Indians in the 19th century, although he was not fluent in the language of the Iroquois. That means many a time ethnographers used a translator in order to understand what people are speaking, what people are discussing. They were not conversant with the language of the group which they studied. The ethnographic tradition found its roots also in natural sciences, particularly in biology, in which scientists documented the habits and characteristics of flora and fauna on their existence. In National Geographic Channel, you might have seen plenty of people showing you flora and fauna in real life situation. So, these biologists and zoologists, they had additional interest in exploring the field. One zoologist named Alfred Court Harden in the year 1890, he collected ethnographic material from the Torres Straits Island. The work of the Polish-born anthropologist Malinowski, he wrote the book, title of the book was The Aeronauts of the Western Pacific in the year 1922. It is one of the canons of the ethnographic tradition in anthropology. It is perhaps the earliest example of a researcher's immersion in the field to produce an ethnographic account. Malinowski spent 6 years, can you imagine, 6 full years from 1914 to 1920 in the Trobriand Islands, making 3 expeditions in the field and writing up his work in the intervals on the systems of exchange of the Trobriand Islanders, even though personally he was disgusted with the method because during the 6 years he had to go through several pains. But he took the pain to learn the language of the Trobriand Islanders. So that was quite interesting, and that is the new beginning, that you need to know the language, because interpreters often they come up with their own interpretation, subjective interpretation, what we say. Apart from Malinowski, apart from Morgan, there are other brilliant ethnographies being conducted by sociologists and social anthropologists. I would only name a few. Ruth Benedict, for instance, wrote a brilliant book, Patterns of Culture. It's based on ethnographic evidences. Even Spicher's account of the Nur is a brilliant way the people and the Neolithic people behave in reality. Margaret Mead also conducted a research and in Somaya and wrote a book, Coming of Age in Somaya. In India, the renowned sociologist M.N. Srinivas wrote the book Remembered Village. It is based on his memory of ethnographic research in a village called Rampura. One must be aware of the situation when ethnographic method is best followed. That means for certain research questions, ethnography is not the best available method of study, but for other techniques, for other areas of social science research, ethnography is the only available method. The point I am making is that the very object of your study, the very purpose of your study should dictate the techniques that you should choose. So ethnography is not a given method for all types of solutions to social issues. What are these issues which would allow you to go for ethnographic research? Fine. When the everyday lives of a section of a people or a community are to be documented, the way people behave in everyday life, that is to be documented, then you have to do ethnography. Then you have to understand the working of another culture. You are from one culture, you want to know the way another culture, people belonging to another culture works. For instance, there is a brilliant study on the way Japanese culture works, right? There is a studies on tribal culture, for instance. So you want to know the working of other culture, you do ethnography. Then culture of a society is to be studied in the present, right? So there are historical documents about, for instance, a tribal, say Munda, Santal, but you want to study how the Santals are behaving now. So obviously ethnography is the best method. Then observing and engaging with the people of a cultural setting. So secondary material won't be helpful to you because you want to study a people in a particular cultural setting. When you are designed to use surveys, questionnaires and interviews, probably you cannot use ethnography. But often you can combine ethnography with, say, interview, group interview could be, with observations. So techniques like dialogue and interviews are often used by ethnographers, and they often combine techniques in order to realize different facets of social life. Let me now talk about the colonial legacy of ethnographic tradition, particularly in India. Now, in the 19th century, ethnography emerged from the concerns of the colonial administrator and missionaries of amassing data about the ways of life and the rituals and beliefs of the natives in the colonies. Because when the colonizers went to the colonies, they had the responsibility to rule it, so they had the responsibility to know it. Unless and until you know about the systems of the people, of the natives, you cannot rule it. In India too, the British started collecting information about the caste, tribe, village and cultural traditions of India. Those interpretations by the British, which is argued to be colonial paradigm by eminent sociologist Okinder Singh, gave rise to the contrary imagination of people's paradigm. So in the nationalist imagination, Indian scholars started protesting against the way colonial interpreters have interpreted Indian tradition, and the Indologists also have interpreted the static way and rigid way and segmented nature of Indian tradition. So these scholars have started collecting field view, to use a term popularized by M.N. Srinivas, as against the book view. For instance, if you study caste through books, you get a book view of society. But if you study caste through field reports, field survey, you get a different version of caste. So Indian scholars started doing that. The positivistic model followed by anthropology was also being questioned. because culture is always changing. Culture could be a text. There are several facts about culture. You cannot scientifically do it only because of the fact there are interpretations and interpretations of meaning. For instance, the way a person behaves in a particular context might differ from his behavior in other context. Now, you need to contextualize that behavior in order to interpret that behavior. Now, scientifically you cannot measure it like a scientist to do a research on a guinea pig in the laboratory. So, we, the social scientists researching on human being, have to see things in the field in a certain way. In the way people behave, people construct their meaning. One eminent anthropologist called Clifford Geertz popularized a term called thick description. It was initially used by Gilbert Ryle to refer to this aspect of thing, that you need to describe your situation in totality as against a thin description, the way people are behaving. For instance, I am talking to you now, right, but you do not know what I am thinking now, right. So, obviously it is a thick description. Do not only describe the way people are doing and behaving, describe more how people construct their meaning, right. So, go beyond what people are doing. Geertz gave a simple example of a boy rapidly contracting one eyes. Now, that could be read as a sort of contracting one eyelid, but that could also be meaningful. It should be kept in mind that in social life we use symbols to communicate our meaning. From a distance you can call your friend by using your fingers, but if you use your fingers in a different way, as it happens in cricket fields, it becomes a protest activity. So, obviously these symbols are to be read, these symbols are to be used in social life, and meaning of these symbols, you have to understand those symbols. Unless and until you are able to interpret the symbols used in daily life, you are able to interpret the meanings of a particular behavior of a particular community, you cannot understand that. I would just give you one example to explain a phenomenon. In Northeast India, if you go for anthropological research, you will be surprised to know that dry fish is a common food for many of the tribals. Now, when I went for a kind of field work in Tripura, I was surprised to see that dry fish is a popular food also for the Bengalis living there. Why it is so? A particular variety of dry fish, it is called shidol there. Now, why it is the fact that dry fish is so popular among the tribes? Now, I went on arguing and asking anthropologists there, and one basic explanation that came to me is that dry fish is anti-malaria. Anti-malaria, and it also saves the people from hunger in two ways. So, there are the two functions of dry fish. On the one hand, dry fish is cheap. You use 2-3 dry fish in a big container, you boil water, put some vegetables and put 2-3 dry fish, it gives a good smell. So, that becomes a good soup for a poverty stricken community. Whole community will be drinking that soup. So, that is economizing your resources. On the other hand, if it gives an anti-malaria drug to you, obviously you have to take it. So, many of them tribals in Northeast, even though they live in jungle, they do not suffer from encephalitis, which is so prominent in the Bengali dominant areas. So, you need to understand the way people behave and behave and practice in social life, starting with fooding behavior to dressing behavior to everything. The way particular tribes dress, the way kind of ornaments that they wear, they are culturally placed. You cannot relate it with your own requirements. The kind of food choices that they have, they are particularly important in that particular context. Let me now begin with another area which is so common in anthropology, that is the native versus outsider debate. Often it was said, it was basically being popularized by white European, that one must study the natives, that is the other, the primitive society. And unless and until you start the other, the outsider, you cannot study your own culture, probably because you are incorporated within it. But if you go to other culture, you find the differences, the way they eat, way they dress, way they talk, way they behave, the marriage patterns. For instance, if you were a Tamil, if you come to Bengal and attend a marriage part ceremony, you would find the differences between a Tamil marriage and a Bengali marriage. Obviously, these are customary differences. So, if you go to other places, you find the differences in taste on food, items on food, dress pattern and so on and so forth. So, the Europeans started arguing for studying other. There is other intention of studying the other. Others are argued to be the colonies, others are people, natives under colonies, and it is the European rulers who are ruling those colonies. So, the European scholars and the missionaries had a vested interest in providing field data to the rulers about the way and practices of the natives who are being ruled by the Europeans. In India, there are some brilliant field works being done in villages, for instance. But the question is, are these field works done by the Indians on an Indian village? Can they be categorized as an insider doing a work? Can one categorize a study? For instance, if I study a Bengali society, can I say that I am studying my own society as an insider? I know the language, but there are other differences. For instance, M.N. Srinivas studied Rampura in 1940s, but he was a Brahmin, so he studied a village when other caste people were there. Then he is an urban man. The way we dress, the way we talk, the way we behave is could be different, and even the language. You go to different parts of Bengal, you find differences in linguistic vocabulary. So, the way dialects are used, these are different. So, even though Srinivas has studied Rampura, even though he is a South Indian, right, he knows the language of Rampura, but he was a Brahmin, he is an urban person, he belongs to a distinct class. So, the question of doing ethnography in my own village is a misnomer, because nothing is mine. In all field situations, I am an alien person, right. I could tell you my example of working in the leather factory. When I went there, the workers thought that I am a man from Delhi. I have come from JNU to do PhD on the leather industry. That was a typical situation, because I need to mix with the worker, I need to develop rapport with them, I need to become their friends. But they started feeling the difference because I was wearing a different kind of shirt and I was using a different kind of mobile and so on and so forth. So, obviously, I started demystifying, changing myself. I started wearing a slipper, a common casual dress, going to workers' home, eating with them. So, obviously, I picked up stomach disease and other kinds of things. So, probably the distance is there in all the fields. You are an alien person. Even though you know the language, it takes time for a particular person to get immersed in the field. But ethnographers, there are brilliant ethnographies being done and they know how to do it. They have been doing this. There are ways of doing this. So, let me now talk about the prerequisites of ethnographic fieldwork. If you are thinking of doing an ethnography, you must be able to master the elements that I will be listing now. Number one, you have to decide about extensive stay in the field. Now, Ramakrishna Mukherjee, one eminent sociologist from Bengal, he has been raising this issue that many of the ethnographers haven't in fact stayed in the village for more than 1 or 2 years. Even if they went intermittently, they did not stay in the village. Even if they stayed in the village, they stayed in a particular segment, with a particular caste. For instance, Srinivas and Bete stayed with the Brahmins. So, extensive stay is one criteria of doing any ethnography. Unless and until you stay for a much larger period of time, it is not ethnography. Then linguistic proficiency, you have to know the language. Otherwise, using someone else to understand the language and interpret to you is a so difficult endeavor. If you are not conversant with the language, you cannot reply to the queries of the particular person. If you are not able to understand that language and answer that question, the difference comes in. That people would start thinking about you as a different man who does not understand his language. So, obviously, in order to hide something from you, they would use their own mother tongue. So they want to hide something. So you have to be prominent in the language in which you are doing the work. Then you have to participate in everyday life. It's not that you have gone there and you are staying in home, fine, you are staying in a village, mixing with some, you have to participate in day-to-day life. How to do it? Participate in social, cultural events, all events. That is the difficult endeavor often, because you have to mix with all kinds of people. So, on the whole, it would appear to you doing ethnography is a challenging task. Finally, more importantly, self-reflexivity is the most important quality of an ethnographer. You need to reflect what a person is thinking. You look into the eyes of a particular person and understand whether he is telling truth or not. That kind of idiosyncratic quality, personal quality you should have. So ethnography is not a cup of tea for every person, for every researcher. Unless and until you are able to manage all these things, probably we would suggest you not to pick up this very strategic and powerful tool of sociological and ethnographical research. Let me now come back to the agenda of ethnographic fieldwork in contemporary sociology. Now, the notion of typical field as separate from home and as a geographically bounded unit has changed from the 1980s. Because of the changes that has taken place, the whole world is a global village. To use a term popularized by Marshall McLuhan, is a global village in the sense that I have friends in US, I have friends in many parts of the world. I communicate daily. Facebook, internet, Twitter, all these things, WhatsApp, they would allow you to communicate with the person, mix with the person who stay in different places. There is a whole world. Secondly, if I consider that even a Bengali village is not my, I'm not an insider even in a Bengali village. So obviously I remain an outsider in a non-Bengali village. So it's possible that you go out and do research in multiple places. More importantly, George Marcus has introduced the notion of multi-sited field as opposed to a single geographically bounded field. Multi-sited fields, because often you have to work on different fields. Do a comparative study of different fields. Take a village from Bardhaman, take a village from Murshidabad, take a village from Purulia. Now one village is Muslim dominated, one village is tribal dominated, the other village is a Bengali dominated, caste dominated village. So you have caste, tribe and religious community together. So obviously this multi-sited village you were asking for because the agenda of your research is a comparison of the way people of different villages live. Maybe you were comparing the status of income status of different sets of people in different sets of villages. Often you take interstate sort of study. For instance, you are comparing Kerala's village with Bengali village. So you have picked up one Kerala village and one Bengali village. You are comparing why in Kerala literacy rate is more high and why in Bengal, for instance, women literacy or tribal literacy is less, right? So, or maybe Muslim literacy is less. You are comparing a Muslim village in Kerala and Muslim village in Bengal. That kind of situation in fact would give you opportunity for multi-sited field as opposed to a single geographically bounded field. From the second half of 19th century, a variety of contexts from urban neighborhood in particular to organizations, study of organizations began to be seen as field. You are studying organization. You are studying one industry, second industry, third industry, different sets of organization in order to arrive at certain conclusions. So from the 1980s, the concept of multi-suited field has emerged because you have to pick up different areas for ethnographic research. Obviously, there is change in the way ethnography is practiced today and we will be talking about this later. Due to increased flow of people, media and discourses across geographical and cultural borders, the field is a globalized world, so it is possible for now to constitute the ethnographic research transnationally. That means we are accepting challenges of conducting ethnography in a multi-sited field. Let me now talk about the challenges of ethnographic method. By now you have become aware that it depends on the quality of the researcher. and many a time the quality of interpretation and the quality of data being collected and written depends on the quality of the researcher himself. But there is a caution. One should not romanticize the culture being observed. If you start romanticizing, that means you are telling lie. You are taking a position. You should not take a position which is your position. If at all you are taking it, you have to clearly state this is your feeling. But our objective is to reflect what people think. So what people think, the way people do, that is to be reflected. Then doing long periods of field work is a difficult endeavor, because you might feel homesickness, staying there in a remote village where there is no toilet is a difficult endeavor for an urban ethnographer who is habituated in a modern toilet. And maybe you rely on internet and so on and so forth. There is no mobile tower, there is no electricity. So staying in a very remote village doing ethnography for months is a difficult endeavor. Then communicative competence, understanding each of the words that are being stated and the language. That is a very crucial thing, and you also need to understand cultural symbols. I have stressed on this earlier. You also should be careful in understanding each and everything that they do. And finally, there must be some code of ethics for each researcher, because you neither can romanticize things nor can bring in something which the people do not think or people haven't said. Finding the appropriate style of writing to represent a culture is most important for you while you are writing it. While you are discussing your finding, you must think that you should represent the way the things have happened, the meanings that are being found in the field. Maybe your own subjective interpretation would go on, but you need to relate different subjective interpretations in order to develop a coherent theory. If there are gaps, there will be questions. Mind it, there is public viewing of your research today. So there will be much more criticism of the gaps being left in your research thing. Selecting a style of writing is a difficult thing. What style of writing you would select? Use the terms. Then how to translate the terms? Cultural translation, these are different things. You are translating a particular term used in a local native setting. What meaning you are carrying? Then some of the fields are spatially bounded, right? That means only in that locality you can find that. Often we say that I have done field work in a particular field, particular village for instance. But that particular village is influenced by urban events. Srinivas had claimed that he has done a field work in a particular village, but Sujata Patel has critiqued that, saying that Rampura was very much influenced by urban India. So how can you say that your field is limited? No, another thing is you have to limit yourself to observable aspects of culture. That is the limit also, because the thing that you haven't observed, you cannot write on that. Many of the things are hidden things. For instance, domestic violence, can you observe it? You cannot observe many of the critical aspects of relationship between human being that you can hear from a particular person, but you cannot observe it, you cannot see it in daily life, right? And many a time conflict, fight between two groups do not happen concurrently, so you cannot observe fights each and every day. Then developing rapport. And developing rapport means you have to become a person like the way people behave in social life, starting with your language competence, to your dress, to your understanding, to your command over the local thing, everything. So establishing rapport, mixing with the people, becoming a man within a crowd is a difficult endeavor. There could be ethical conflicts in the sense that to what extent you should maintain distance from the field. This is a very difficult question. Because if you do not maintain distance from the field, if you get totally immersed in the field and if you start supporting a particular thing, then it is a difficult endeavor. I would give you one example to explain this. For instance, you have gone to study caste. Now you see the way caste is being maintained and caste is being sustained. Now as a neutral observer, you should observe that, right? You should have your own view. But if you become a common man and argue in the way the people are arguing and the issues and the demands that the people are doing, right? For instance, you are studying Dalit movement, fine, you study it from a distance as a neutral observer. But once you yourself become a Dalit, you feel that you are a Dalit, you are oppressed, you are supporting Dalit movement, you are arguing for Dalits, then probably you are becoming biased. So remaining neutral, keeping distance from the field, one very objective of social research. Another problem with challenge of ethnography is immersion in the field will never be complete. Whatever you stay duration it may be, you remain an outsider. I have been doing research in tea gardens, in villages of Malda, in Northeast. I have seen, despite my awareness, despite my knowledge, despite going repeatedly there, I am argued to be a person from Delhi or a person from university and so on and so forth. So many a time your immersion in the field remain incomplete, and natives see you as an outsider, despite the fact that you have stayed with them, you talked with them, you mix in the way that you do it. So ethnographic approach of doing field work relies on observations made by the ethnographer in the present, and you cannot study something which has happened in the past. That is another limitation. Anything that has happened in the past, a conflict, a communal riot, so on and so forth, you cannot observe it. You have to see only the thing in the present. Maybe in a particular village there is a communal riot, right? You went to UP to study communal riot, but it has taken place 3 months back, but now it is a normalcy, people living in normal life. So many of the things that you would see would not allow you to reveal the kind of life and the kind of tensions that the people went through during that place. So let me come back to the end of the discussion, saying that ethnography is one of the brilliant techniques of collecting data, field data, because it allows you the facility to capture real life data as it happens. It allows you to contradict theoretical findings. Now, you must keep in mind the major purpose of doing research. Major purpose is to strengthen a theory, debate with the theory, reject a theory, or extend the theory. Now, ethnographic research allows you that kind of facilities, that you go to the field, observe the way people do it, and come up with a new kind of explanation. But there are limitations of ethnographic research. You need resources. You should have your personal capacity to learn the language, to behave like that, and stay in that particular locality for longitudinal period. Often we have seen that ethnographers therefore use triangulation of methods in order to collect different facets of data, and we have already discussed about the merits of triangulation in a distinct module in this paper on research methodology. I do hope that you will be able to read the text in the EPG Pathshala and also other materials being uploaded there, and be aware of the possibilities and limits of all techniques of data collection for doing research. Thank you very much.